You know, there's a special kind of hope that fills your heart on your child's wedding day. It's a hope that's been quietly growing for years, through scraped knees and late-night fevers, through school dances and heartbreaks, through every moment you've stood by their side. That morning, as I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down the dress I'd picked out months ago, I felt that hope fluttering in my chest. My hands shook just a little as I pinned on my favorite brooch, the one my own mother wore on her wedding day. I told myself, today is a celebration. Today you'll be surrounded by family, laughter, and love. If you've ever been a parent, you know that feeling. The nerves, the pride, the bittersweet ache of letting go. I stepped out into the bright sunlight, the air humming with the promise of a new beginning. Not just for my daughter, but for our whole family. The venue was grand, draped in white and gold, with flowers spilling from every corner. I could hear the hum of laughter as I walked up the steps, the clinking of glasses, the distant strains of a string quartet. The scent of roses and fresh bread drifted on the breeze, mingling with the sharper tang of champagne. I paused for a moment, letting it all wash over me. This was the day I'd dreamed of for so long. But as I entered, something felt off. You know that feeling, don't you? When you walk into a room and realize you're not quite where you belong. The hostess, a young woman with a clipboard and a forced smile, barely glanced at me. "Oh, you're the mother of the bride? Right this way." No warm greeting, no welcome, just a quick glance and a nod toward the back. I followed her, my heart sinking with every step. The main hall was alive with chatter, guests hugging, old friends reuniting, laughter echoing off the high ceilings. I searched the crowd for my daughter, hoping for a wave, a smile, some sign that she'd seen me. But she was surrounded by her new in-laws, her friends, her father. I stood there, invisible, clutching my purse a little tighter. The hostess led me past the beautifully set tables near the dance floor. Tables with crisp linens and crystal glasses, right in the heart of the celebration. Instead, she guided me to a small table tucked away near the kitchen doors. The hum of the party faded, replaced by the clatter of pots and pans, the sharp bark of a chef giving orders. The smell of roasting chicken and garlic, food I'd paid for, wafted through the swinging doors, but none of it reached my plate. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. My name wasn't on the program. There was no special mention, no mother of the bride toast, just a simple place card with my name, spelled wrong, perched on a table that might as well have been in another building. Every now and then, a waiter would rush past, barely glancing at me. I could hear the laughter from the main hall, the clinking of glasses, the music swelling as the bride and groom entered to a chorus of cheers. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, you know exactly what I mean. It's a cold, hollow ache, a kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones. I watched my daughter from afar, her face glowing with happiness, her arm linked with her new husband's. I smiled because that's what mothers do. We smile even when our hearts are breaking. We stay quiet, even when we want to scream, and we hope, oh we hope, that maybe, just maybe, someone will notice us. But that day, I realized I was just a guest at my own daughter's wedding. No, not even a guest. I was an afterthought, tucked away behind the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of food I wasn't invited to enjoy. And so, I sat there, quietly, letting the sounds and smells of the celebration swirl around me, holding on to my hope like a lifeline, not knowing that everything was about to change. There's something about a folding chair that just tells you where you stand. It's not like the elegant cushioned seats out in the main hall. The ones with gold trim and white bows tied just so. No, this was a plain metal folding chair, cold, a little wobbly, and set so close to the kitchen door that every time it swung open, I caught a blast of heat and the sharp clang of dishes. If you've ever been seated somewhere that made you feel small, you know exactly what I mean. It's not just a chair. It's a message. I sat down, the metal biting through my dress, and tried to steady my hands. All around me, the world moved on. Waiters bustled past with trays of appetizers I'd chosen from tastings months ago. The laughter from the main hall floated back here, muffled by the clatter of the kitchen. I could hear the DJ's voice announcing the bridal party and the crowd's applause as my daughter and her new husband entered. My heart swelled with pride, and then just as quickly deflated, because I wasn't there to see it. Not really. I was out of sight, out of mind. It hit me then, harder than I expected, all those years. Every scraped knee I kissed, every nightmare I soothed away, every lunch I packed, and every tear I wiped. I remembered the nights I stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings I woke before dawn to braid her hair just the way she liked. I remembered the afternoons in the kitchen teaching her to roll out dough for cookies, her laughter ringing through the house. The sacrifices, oh, there were so many. Working double shifts so she could have piano lessons, passing up new shoes so she could go on the class trip, smiling through exhaustion, always putting her first. And now, here I was, sitting on a folding chair by the kitchen, as if none of it had ever happened, as if I were just another guest, or maybe not even that, just someone to be tucked away, out of sight, so as not to disturb the perfect picture. I glanced down at my hands that had held her, comforted her, clapped for her at every recital and graduation. Now they trembled just a little, resting in my lap. I could feel the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. Not here. Not now. Don't ruin her day. Don't be that mother, I told myself over and over. If you've ever been in a moment like that, you know how hard it is to hold it all in. You want to stand up to shout, "I'm here, I matter." But you swallow it down, because you love them, because you want their day to be perfect, even if it means breaking your own heart a little. I tried to focus on the little things, the way the sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting rainbows on the floor, the scent of roses, mingling with the rich aroma of roasting chicken and fresh bread. I tried to remember that this was supposed to be a happy day, but every time I looked at that folding chair, every time the kitchen door swung open and a burst of laughter from the main hall drifted back, I felt that ache grow deeper. I remembered the first time I held her, tiny and pink, swaddled in a hospital blanket. I remembered the promises I whispered to her in the quiet of the night, that I would always love her, always protect her, always be there. I remembered her first steps, her first words, the way she used to run into my arms at the end of a long day. Where had that little girl gone? When had I become invisible? The memories came in waves. Her first heartbreak, when she cried on my shoulder for hours. The time she failed her driving test and I took her out for ice cream, telling her it was okay to fall down as long as she got back up. The nights I waited up worrying, praying she was safe. The pride I felt when she graduated, when she landed her first job, when she called me just to say, "I love you, Mom." And now, on her wedding day, I was an afterthought, not even mentioned in the program, not called up for a toast, not seated with family or friends. Just a folding chair by the kitchen, close enough to smell the food, but not close enough to taste. The joy! I glanced at my phone, wondering if anyone had noticed. A few texts from friends. "You must be so proud." "Where are you sitting?" I didn't have the heart to answer. How could I explain this feeling? How could I put into words the way it hurt to be so close and yet so far away? The kitchen. Door swung open again, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of my daughter, radiant in her dress, laughing, surrounded by people who seemed to matter more than I did. I smiled, because that's what mothers do. We smile, even when we're breaking inside. We stay quiet, even when every part of us wants to scream. If you've ever felt like you were watching your own life from the sidelines, you know what I'm talking about. It's a strange, hollow ache, a sense that you've given everything and somehow it still wasn't enough. That maybe, just maybe, you're not needed anymore. But I held on to my dignity, sitting up a little straighter in that uncomfortable chair. I reminded myself, don't ruin her day. Don't be that mother. I forced my lips into a smile, even as my eyes stung with unshed tears. I listened to the laughter, the music, the celebration happening just out of reach, and I told myself that this was her moment, that my job was to fade into the background, to let her shine. Still, in the quiet of that corner, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I become invisible? When did all those years of love and sacrifice become something to be hidden away, like an old coat in the back of a closet? I thought about all the times I'd put her first, all the dreams I'd set aside so she could chase hers, and I wondered if she would ever understand what it felt like to be here, on her wedding day, sitting alone on a folding chair by the kitchen. The sounds of the party grew louder, the clinking of glasses, the music swelling as the first dance began. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over me, holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would change, that someone would notice, that I would matter again. For now, I sat quietly, holding back tears and clinging, to my pride repeating to myself, don't ruin her day, don't be that mother. Sometimes love means staying silent and letting go, even when the silence feels unbearably heavy. There's a certain cruelty in being close enough to joy, yet too far to share in it. I perched on that cold folding chair, the kitchen door swinging, open and shut, each time a brief glimpse of a celebration I was no longer a part of. Through the window I saw my daughter, radiant, laughing, surrounded by friends, and her new family. Her laughter, once my favorite sound, now echoed from a distance I couldn't cross. The speeches began. Her father spoke first, recounting her childhood as if he alone had been there, never mentioning the nights we soothed her fevers or read her favorite stories. In his version, he was the hero. I was just a shadow. Her best friend followed, sharing warm memories. But again, no mention of the mother who packed lunches, helped with projects, and cheered at every recital. If you've ever watched others celebrate moments you helped create, you know the ache. It's like standing in the rain, looking into a home you once belonged to. The kitchen bustled around me, unnoticed. The scent of roasting chicken and garlic brought me back to our old kitchen, where my daughter and I baked cookies, her laughter filling the air. I remembered her 7th birthday, working double shifts for her princess party, and staying up all night to make her cake. I remembered comforting her after heartbreaks, waiting up at night and sacrificing so she could have more. But now, all those moments faded as I watched her glide across the dance floor, radiant and carefree, while I sat in the shadows, holding back tears. If you've ever swallowed your pride for someone you love, you know how heavy it feels. I wanted to remind everyone of my years of devotion, but I stayed seated, repeating, "Don't ruin her day. Don't be that mother." Even when a server asked if I was with the bride's family, I forced a smile, still invisible, a ghost. At the feast, the celebration continued. Clinking glasses, laughter, dancing. Each sound reminded me how far I'd drifted from the life I'd helped build. Watching my daughter dance with her father, I remembered dancing her to sleep as a child. A wave of sadness threatened to overwhelm me, but I blinked back tears, determined not to break. I thought of all the times I'd been her rock, her safe place, yet here I was, alone on her wedding day, watching from the sidelines. The pain of invisibility settled deep in my chest. I tried to remind myself this was her day, that my job was to support her, even if it meant being hidden away. But the hurt only grew with every passing moment. If you've ever felt yourself fading from someone's life, you know how hard it is to hold on to your pride. You want to shout, to remind them of all you've done. But instead you stay silent, swallowing your pain, because sometimes love means letting go. The kitchen door swung open again, and I glimpsed my daughter, eyes shining, laughter bright. For a moment I hoped she'd notice me, maybe rush over with open arms. But the moment passed. She turned away, lost in her celebration. I leaned back, letting the sounds and scents of roses, cake, and distant music wash over me. I remembered the little girl who once needed me for everything, and the strong, independent woman she'd become, now just out of reach. My pride in her was real, but so was the sorrow. I mourned the closeness we'd lost and wondered if she'd ever understand the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd poured into her life. If you've ever loved someone so much it hurt, you know the pain of watching your role in their story change. It's a bittersweet ache, a mix of pride, loss, love, and longing. I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and forced a smile. I wouldn't let anyone see my pain. I would not ruin her day. I would be the mother she needed, even if it meant being invisible. The celebration grew louder. I watched her toss her bouquet, remembered her as a child weaving wildflower crowns, looking up at me with trust and love. Now she searched a sea of faces for someone else. I wondered if she'd ever remember the mother who sat quietly by the kitchen, holding back tears and swallowing her pride. If you've ever felt invisible among those you love, you know the pain I carried that day. Yet even in that hurt, I held on to hope. Hope that one day she'd understand and that I'd matter again. And so I sat quietly on that folding chair, watching the celebration through a swinging door, holding back tears and swallowing my pride. Because that's what mothers do. We love, we sacrifice, we endure, even when no one is watching. They say every storm has a breaking point, a flash of lightning, a clap of thunder that splits the sky and changes everything. For me, that moment came not with a shout, but with a whisper. Sometimes it's not the loudest insult that wounds the deepest, but the quiet, careless words spoken when people think you're not listening. I was still at my little table by the kitchen, swirling the untouched water in my glass, when I heard laughter from just beyond the swinging door. The voices were familiar. My daughter's, bright and bubbling, and her new in-laws, their tones light and teasing. I couldn't make out every word, but then clear as day, I heard her mother-in-law say, "Well, at least you didn't have to worry about your mother making a scene. She's always been so reserved, hasn't she?" My daughter's answer was a dagger wrapped in a giggle. "Oh, she's harmless. We sat her near the kitchen so she wouldn't get in the way. She likes to keep to herself anyway." The group erupted in laughter, the sound sharp as shattered glass. If you've ever overheard someone you love dismiss you, you know that pain. It's a cold, sinking feeling, like the floor has dropped out from under you. My cheeks burned with humiliation, my hands trembling as I struggled to keep my composure. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, that surely my daughter hadn't meant it that way. But the laughter told me otherwise. I stared down at my lap, fighting back tears. All those years of sacrifice, of love, of putting her first, reduced to a joke at my expense. I felt small, foolish, and utterly alone. The ache in my chest grew sharper, each breath a struggle. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, grateful for the distraction, and saw a notification from social media. Someone had tagged me in a photo. The wedding party, all smiles and celebration. I clicked on it, hoping for a glimpse of my daughter, maybe even a kind word. But as I scrolled through the comments, my heart sank further. "Where's the mother of the bride?" someone had asked. "Oh, she's hiding in the kitchen, LOL," replied one of my daughter's friends. "Guess she finally learned to stay out of the limelight," another chimed in. I felt the sting of humiliation all over again. Not only had I been pushed aside, but my absence was now a punchline for others to enjoy. If you've ever felt the world laughing at your pain, you know how it can hollow you out, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. I set my phone down, my hands shaking. That's when I noticed a small envelope tucked into my purse, the corner peeking out beneath my wallet. I pulled it free, recognizing the handwriting immediately. My daughter's, hurried and careless. Inside was a receipt from the wedding venue, along with a note. "Thanks for covering the extras, Mom. We just needed a little more to make everything perfect. Love you." My eyes darted to the total, an amount far greater than I'd agreed to contribute. My credit card had been charged for decorations, upgraded meals, even a late-night dessert bar I hadn't known about. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even told me. She'd just assumed I would pay, because that's what I'd always done. A wave of betrayal crashed over me, stronger than anything I'd felt that day. It wasn't just the money. It was the assumption, the entitlement, the complete disregard for my feelings or my boundaries. I thought of all the times I'd gone without so she could have more. All the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All the times I'd let her take just a little more because I loved her. But this was different. This was a line crossed, a trust broken. My humiliation turned, slowly and quietly, into something else. Fury. Not the kind that explodes in angry words or tears, but the kind that settles deep in your bones, cold and certain. The kind that says, "Enough." If you've ever reached that point, you know what I mean. It's the moment when the pain stops being just pain and starts to become resolve. I sat up a little straighter in my chair, my hands steady now, my heart beating with a new clarity. I looked around the room, not at the celebration, but at the details. The flowers I'd paid for, the food I'd funded, the venue I'd helped. Secure. I realized in that moment just how much power I still held. I thought back to all the times I'd stayed silent, all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. I thought of the little girl I'd raised, the woman she'd become, and the mother I'd allowed myself to be. Always giving, always forgiving, always invisible. But not anymore. If you've ever been pushed to your limit, you know how it feels when the switch flips. The sadness doesn't go away, but it changes shape. It becomes strength. It becomes resolve. It becomes the quiet fury of someone who's finally had enough. I slipped the receipt back into my purse, my mind racing with possibilities. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't ruin her day. But I would not be invisible any longer. I would not let my love be taken for granted. Not one more time. As the music swelled and the laughter echoed through the hall, I sat in my folding chair, calm and composed, a storm gathering behind my eyes. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was quiet, but they had forgotten. Sometimes the quietest storms are the most powerful. If you've ever been underestimated, you know exactly what I mean. That was the moment I decided I would reclaim my dignity. I would take back my power. And I would do it not with anger, but with grace, with poise, and with a resolve they'd never see coming. Because sometimes the sweetest justice isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to never let anyone make you feel invisible again. There comes a moment when you realize you've given enough, when the ache of being overlooked finally outweighs the fear of being alone. For me, that moment arrived quietly as the laughter and music from the reception faded into the background. I stood up from my folding chair, smoothed my dress, and walked out the side door. No one noticed. No one called after me. I slipped away as easily as a shadow at dusk. The night air was cool against my skin, a gentle relief after the stifling heat by the kitchen. I paused for a moment on the steps, listening to the distant hum of celebration behind me. If you've ever walked away from something you once cherished, you know the bittersweet taste of freedom and loss mingling on your tongue. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, and made my way to the hotel. Inside my room, the silence was heavy, but it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, my purse in my lap, and pulled out the envelope with the receipt. The proof of all the extra charges, all the little ways I'd been expected to give without question. I spread out the papers on the comforter. Invoices for flowers, for food, for favors I never agreed to. Each number was a reminder of the boundaries crossed, the gratitude never given. I scrolled through my phone, reading the social media posts, the comments that mocked my absence, the photos that cropped me out. The evidence was everywhere. I had been erased, not by accident, but by design. My daughter had used my love, my resources, and my silence to build her perfect day, never once thinking about the cost to me. As I sat there, a wave of memories washed over me. Every birthday party I'd planned, every late-night conversation, every sacrifice made in the name of love. I realized how many times I'd let myself be used, how many times I'd chosen peace over self-respect. I saw, with painful clarity, the pattern I'd allowed to continue. Always giving, always forgiving, always invisible. But something had shifted inside me. The humiliation and anger from earlier had settled into a quiet determination. If you've ever reached the end of your rope, you know the feeling. It's not loud or dramatic. It's a steady, unshakable resolve. I would not let this be the story of my life. Not anymore. I looked at my reflection in the window, the city lights twinkling behind me. For the first time in a long time, I saw not just a mother, but a woman who deserved respect, who deserved to be seen. I straightened my shoulders, wiped away the last of my tears, and made a decision. No more. No more being invisible. No more being used. I would reclaim my dignity, my voice, and my place in the world. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this. I would never again let anyone make me feel small. If you've ever had to remind yourself of your own worth, you know what I mean. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I chose myself. For the first time in a very long time. And that choice, quiet as it was, changed everything. There's a quiet strength that comes from making a decision for yourself. One that isn't about pleasing others or keeping the peace, but about finally standing up for your own worth. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my hotel window, I felt that strength settle deep in my bones. The pain of exclusion was still there, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. In its place grew a calm, steady resolve. I sat back on the bed, the wedding receipts and social media posts spread out before me like evidence in a trial. For so long, I'd let myself believe that love meant sacrifice, that being a good mother meant never asking for anything in return. But now, I saw things differently. Love is not about erasing yourself. It's about being seen, being valued, and knowing when it's time to draw a line. As I gathered the papers, my mind wandered to an old friend. Richard, the owner of the wedding venue. Years ago, when he was just starting out, I'd believed in him. I'd invested a small sum, enough to help him secure the property and get his business off the ground. We'd stayed in touch over the years, sharing updates and the occasional coffee. I'd watched his venue become the most sought-after spot in town, a place where dreams were made and memories created. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found his name. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment. I took a deep breath, remembering the laughter from the reception, the sting of my daughter's words, the cold reality of being used. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before Richard picked up, his voice warm and familiar. Well, if it isn't my favorite silent partner, to what do I owe the pleasure? I smiled, despite everything. Richard, I hope I'm not calling too late. For you? Never. Is everything all right? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was at the wedding tonight. My daughter's. At your venue. He paused, the weight of my words sinking in. I didn't realize it was your family. Everything went smoothly, I hope. I let out a soft laugh, tinged with irony. For everyone else, yes. For me, not so much. I need to talk business, Richard. About the venue. About my stake. He was silent for a moment. Then his tone shifted to one of respect and curiosity. Of course. What's on your mind? I explained the situation. Not in detail, not with bitterness, but with the calm clarity of someone who's finally had enough. I told him how I'd been treated, how my contributions had been taken for granted, how I'd been made invisible on a day that was supposed to be about family and love. Richard listened quietly, never interrupting. When I finished, he let out a long breath. I'm so sorry, truly. You deserve better. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Thank you. I've decided I want to increase my stake in the venue. I want to be more than just a silent partner. I want to have a say, to be involved. And for now, I'd like to exercise my rights as an investor. He understood immediately. You want to take control of the space? Yes, I said, my voice steady. I want to secure ownership rights. And I want to make some changes, starting with the event scheduled for tomorrow. I'd like to cancel the post-wedding brunch and any other gatherings associated with tonight's event. Richard didn't hesitate. Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork drawn up in the morning, and for what it's worth, I think this is long overdue. We talked for a while longer, discussing the details. My financial leverage, the legal steps, the transition of authority. It was business, yes, but it was also personal. With every word, I felt the weight of years spent in the background begin to lift. I wasn't acting out of spite. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. my dignity, my voice, my place in the world. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, letting the reality sink in. I had done it. I had taken a step for myself, not for my daughter, not for anyone else, but for me. It felt strange at first, liberating, but also a little frightening. If you've ever put yourself first after a lifetime of putting others ahead, you know what I mean. It takes courage, and it takes time to trust that you deserve it. The next morning, I met Richard at the venue. The staff was bustling about, clearing away the remnants of the celebration, wilted flowers, empty glasses, confetti scattered across the floor. The air still carried the faint scent of roses and champagne, but the magic of the night before had faded, replaced by the practical business of cleaning up. Richard greeted me with a hug, his eyes kind. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Nodded, feeling more certain than I had in years. "Absolutely. It's time." We sat down in his office, surrounded by framed photos of happy couples and glowing reviews. He slid the paperwork across the desk, and I signed my name with a steady hand. With each signature, I felt a piece of my old self return. The woman who had dreams of her own, who had taken risks, who had believed in herself. Once the papers were signed, Richard made a few calls. The post-wedding brunch was cancelled. The staff was informed that I was now a primary owner, with full authority over the space. There was no drama, no confrontation, just a quiet shift in power, a gentle but firm assertion of my worth. As I walked through the empty hall, I paused by the spot where I'd been seated the night before. The folding chair was gone, replaced by a stack of linens waiting to be laundered. I stood there for a moment, remembering the pain of invisibility, the sting of exclusion. But now, those feelings were tempered by something new, pride. I wandered through the venue, taking in the details I'd once admired from afar. The soaring ceilings, the sparkling chandeliers, the sunlight streaming through tall windows. I thought about all the couples who would celebrate here, all the families who would gather, all the memories yet to be made. And I realized that I was a part of it, not just as a silent supporter, but as a leader, a creator, a force to be reckoned with. Later that day, I sat in the owner's office, sipping coffee and reviewing the books. I saw the numbers, the bookings, the potential for growth. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of possibility, of excitement for the future. I wasn't just reclaiming my dignity. I was building something new, something that belonged to me. Word of the changes spread quickly. My daughter called, her voice tight with confusion and concern. "Mom, what's going on? Why was the brunch cancelled? Why is everyone saying you own the venue now?" I listened to her questions, her frustration, her disbelief. But I didn't waver. I explained calmly and clearly that I had made a decision for myself, that I was no longer willing to be invisible, to be used, to be taken for granted. I told her that I loved her, but that love doesn't mean erasing yourself for someone else's happiness. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered the folding chair, the laughter behind the kitchen door, the receipt in my purse. I stood my ground, knowing that I was doing what was right, for me. If you've ever had to set a boundary with someone you love, you know how hard it is. The guilt, the fear, the uncertainty. They're all there, whispering that you're being selfish, that you're making a mistake. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, enough. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. As the day went on, I received calls and messages from family and friends. Some supportive, some confused, some even angry. I answered each one with the same calm resolve. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was simply reclaiming my place in the world, reminding myself and everyone else that I mattered. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I stood in the empty hall, the golden light casting long shadows across the floor. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had faced my pain, my humiliation, my anger, and I had transformed them into something powerful, something beautiful. If you've ever taken back your power after being pushed aside, you know the feeling. It's not about winning or losing. It's about dignity. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing, deep in your bones, that you are worthy of love, of recognition, of happiness. I walked through the venue one last time that night, running my hand along the polished tables, breathing in the scent of fresh flowers. I thought about the little girl I'd raised, the woman I'd become, and the journey that had brought me here. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with hope, with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had finally come home to myself. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been overlooked or underestimated, I hope you know this. You are not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And it's never too late to reclaim your place in the world. News travels fast in families, and even faster when there's a hint of scandal in the air. By the time the sun had set on my first full day as the venue's new owner, the ripples of my decision were already turning into waves. My phone, which had sat silent for so long, now buzzed and chimed with relentless urgency. Calls, texts, voicemails, notifications stacking up one after another. It started with my daughter. Her number flashed on my screen over and over, each call more insistent than the last. I could picture her, pacing her honeymoon suite, confusion and anger written on her face, her new husband and in-laws buzzing around her, demanding answers. I let the calls go to voicemail. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to rush in and fix things, to smooth over the trouble, or swallow my own feelings for the sake of peace. Then came the messages. Some were frantic. "Mom, what did you do? Why is everyone saying you own the venue now?" Others were sharp. "How could you embarrass us like this?" Some from extended family and old friends were softer. "Are you okay?" "We're here if you need to talk." I read each one, feeling the weight of their confusion and judgment, but I didn't reply. Not yet. The in-laws joined in, their numbers unfamiliar, but their tone unmistakable. "We need to discuss what's happened. This isn't how families handle things. You've caused quite a scene." I almost laughed at that. If only they knew how much I'd held back, how quietly I'd endured. If you've ever been accused of making a scene after years of being silent, you know the irony stings almost as much as the original wound. I let the phone ring, let the messages pile up. I needed space, and for once, I was determined to take it. I spent the day walking through the venue, speaking with Richard and the staff, making plans for the future. Each step I took, each decision I made, felt like a small act of healing, a way to stitch up the places where I'd been torn. That evening, as the sky blushed pink and gold, I sat in the quiet office overlooking the empty hall. The world outside was moving fast, but in here, time seemed to slow. I thought about how easy it would be to explain myself, to justify my actions, to try and win back the approval of people who had never truly seen me. But then I remembered the folding chair, the laughter behind the kitchen door, the receipt in my purse. I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The truth was in the facts, in the choices I'd made, in the boundaries I'd finally set. Still, I knew the questions would keep coming. The rumors would swirl, the stories would grow, and everyone would want to know. Why? Why now? Why her? So, I decided to let the truth speak for itself. I opened my purse and pulled out the deed to the venue. The crisp official paper with my name printed in bold at the top. I set it on the polished desk and snapped a photo, the light catching the gold seal in the corner. No words, no explanations, just the simple, undeniable proof of what I'd done. I opened my social media account, the same one where I'd seen the jokes at my expense, the comments about my absence. I uploaded the photo with a single caption. Sometimes you have to write your own story. That was it. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet statement of fact. I hit post and set my phone aside, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. The reaction was immediate. Notifications exploded across my screen. Likes, comments, messages pouring in from every corner of my life. Some were supportive. Good. For you. Proud of you for standing up for yourself. Others were confused or even angry. How could you do this to your daughter? This isn't the woman we thought we knew. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. The deed spoke louder than any explanation ever could. My daughter called again, her voice trembling on the voicemail. Mom, please. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Can we talk? I listened, my heart aching for the little girl she once was, the one who used to run into my arms without hesitation. But I also knew that this was a lesson she needed, to learn that love is not about endless giving, that respect must go both ways. The in-laws sent a flurry of texts, some demanding, some pleading. I read them all but remained silent. I knew that any response would only invite more questions, more attempts to pull me back into the role I'd played for so long. The peacemaker, the fixer, the invisible support. I was done with that. Instead, I focused on the future. I met with Richard and the staff, discussing ways to make the venue more welcoming, more inclusive. I thought about hosting community events, about creating a space where no one would ever feel invisible or unappreciated. I poured my energy into building something new, something that reflected the woman I was becoming. If you've ever made a decision that shocked the people around you, you know the fallout can be intense. There's confusion, anger, even betrayal. But there's also freedom, a sense of finally living your truth, no matter what others think. That night, as the city settled into darkness, I sat by the window and watched the lights twinkle in the distance. My phone buzzed and chimed, but I let it be. I knew that the story was no longer about what others thought of me. It was about what I thought of myself. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the years of sacrifice, the pain of invisibility, the quiet fury that had finally given way to resolve. I thought about the moment I'd chosen myself, and the peace that had followed. If you've ever stood your ground after a lifetime of giving in, you know that peace is hard won. It's not always comfortable, and it's rarely easy, but it's worth it. I smiled to myself, feeling lighter than I had in years. The world outside might be in chaos, but inside, I was finally at peace. I had let the truth speak for itself, and that was enough. And if you've ever wondered whether your story matters, whether your voice deserves to be heard, let me tell you, it does. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet act of power to change everything. As the days passed, the noise faded. The calls and messages slowed, replaced by a gentle quiet that felt more like peace than loneliness. In that space, I found time to reflect on everything that had brought me here. The sting of being overlooked, the ache of invisibility, and the courage it took to finally stand up and say, I matter. I realized that my journey wasn't just about one wedding or one moment of exclusion. It was about reclaiming my voice after years of silence. It was about learning that love doesn't mean erasing yourself, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of what no longer serves you. I wanted to mark this new beginning, not with bitterness, but with gratitude and hope. So I decided to host a dinner at the venue, a gathering not of obligation but of choice. I invited friends who had stood by me, neighbors who had offered a kind word, and colleagues who saw my worth. These were my chosen family, the people who celebrated my victories and held me up in my darkest hours. The night of the dinner, the hall glowed with soft light and laughter. The air was warm with the scent of home-cooked food and fresh flowers. No folding chairs, no one pushed to the sidelines. Every guest had a seat at the table. Every story was heard. Every smile was genuine. As dessert was served, I stood to raise a toast. My voice was steady, my heart full. To self-worth, I said, meeting the eyes of those who truly saw me. To new beginnings, and to never ever sitting quietly in the kitchen again. Glasses clinked, laughter rang out, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew I would face them with my head held high. I had found my voice, my strength, and my place in the world. And if you've ever wondered if it's too late to choose yourself, let me assure you, it never is. There's always time for new beginnings, and always room at the table for those who see your true worth. A few weeks later, as life began to settle into its new rhythm, my daughter reached out. Her voice, tentative and softer than I'd heard in years, trembled with the weight of things left unsaid. She wanted to meet, to talk, to understand. I agreed, but this time I met her on my terms, in the sunlit lounge of the venue I now owned. She apologized, tears glistening in her eyes as she spoke of regret and realization. She asked for forgiveness, for another chance to be a part of my life. I listened with an open heart, because forgiveness, I've learned, is a gift you give yourself as much as anyone else. But I was clear. I love you, I told her gently, and I will always be your mother. But things have changed. Respect is not optional. I won't be invisible again. Not for you. Not for anyone. If you want me in your life, you'll have to meet me as an equal, with kindness and honesty. She nodded, understanding at last that boundaries are not walls, but doors to healthier relationships. As she left, I stood by the window watching the world outside, feeling a peace I'd never known before. My journey had brought me full circle, not just to a place of ownership, but to a place of self-worth, and as I looked out over the city, I spoke the truth I'd earned. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply refusing to be invisible. I bought the venue, but more importantly, I bought back my life. If you've ever felt unseen, remember, your story isn't over. You have the power to write your own ending, and to make it a beautiful one. Throughout my journey, emotions ran deeper than words could ever capture. There was heartbreak, raw and sharp, when I realized I'd been placed on that cold kitchen chair, tucked away from the celebration I'd dreamed of for years. The sting of shame followed, a heavy cloak that settled on my shoulders as laughter echoed from the main hall, and my own daughter's voice was just out of reach. Nostalgia swept over me in quiet moments, a flood of memories. Birthday candles, blown out with giggles, late-night lullabies, small hands reaching for mine. Each flashback was bittersweet, a reminder of love's enduring power and the ache of watching it change. But beneath the sadness simmered a quiet rage. It wasn't the kind that explodes in angry words, but the kind that hardens resolve. Every time I glanced at that folding chair by the kitchen, it became more than just a seat. It was a symbol of all the times I'd been sidelined, all the moments I'd been asked to shrink so others could shine. The chair was a silent witness to my pain, and eventually, to my decision to rise. The deed to the venue became another symbol, one of reclamation and transformation. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that I could take back my story, that I could turn exclusion into empowerment. And when I removed the old family photo from the wall, it wasn't out of spite, but as a gentle acknowledgement that some chapters must close for new ones to begin. Catharsis came in waves, first as tears, then as laughter, and finally as a sense of peace. Through heartbreak and shame, through nostalgia and rage, I found my way to self-love. I learned that my worth isn't defined by where I sit or who acknowledges me, but by the strength I carry within. And now, I turn to you. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by those you love? Have you ever found yourself on the sidelines of your own story? Share your story. You are not alone. Together we can remind each other that every journey matters and every voice deserves to be heard.